Hey everybody, it's Dave here with Blue Bears Games. Today's episode, we're going to be doing what I promised for the last 2 weeks, which is a Blues Brews. This is a non-budget brew. This is my own personal brew that I am going to be using myself, and it is Mono Green Omnath for Commander. Omnath himself is actually a unique commander in that while he's mono green, he can be used in many different ways. I'm going to use him in the typical fashion. I'm not going to use him as a commander damage win. I am actually doing a somewhat different style of elf tribal build instead of doing the smash with Omnath because it can be done either way. But I decided to go a little different with it, and it's not just elf, but it's kind of like utility elf with dinosaurs instead of most people do Eldrazi. So it's Eldrazi with elves. I'm going to go a different direction, and my build I went with dinosaurs because they have a little bit more utility, and it's different. So that's what I went with. So let me read Omnath to you, and we'll go from there. So I went the mono green Omnath, which is Omnath, Locus of Mana. It's 1 green, 2 generic, and he starts off as a 1/1. And his abilities read as green mana doesn't empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end. What that means is he carries all green mana throughout all the phases, all the steps, and even turns. So you can build mana on other turns, and it stays in your pool as long as you don't use it. Secondly, he also gets +1/+1 for each green mana in your mana pool. So a lot of people like to use him for Omnath Smash. So I went Stompy with elves instead. But I also have the sub-theme of putting dinosaurs in there because I thought it would be cool to have a little bit of a different theme. So that's Omnath. Let me go over what I chose as far as the rest of the deck. This one's going to be a little different than normal. I only have 4 sections because it's a Stompy deck, and with a Stompy deck, it's mostly based on the utility from the creatures. So my ramp sections and my my utility and stuff like that, it's going to be a little different. So I'll go over all that as we go. So, like I said, the ramp section's a little different. Let me zoom out a little bit here for you so you can see. I went with a stereotypical Soul Ring just because I wanted to first turn Soul Ring. I can pretty much, if I do it right, get Omnath on the board first turn very, very rarely, and then second turn going forward. And then I also have in here an Emerald Medallion. It's 2 to cast. It's an artifact that lets all your green spells become 1 generic less to play. So, first turn, this isn't a bad play. Lay Forest down, tap Soul Ring, put Emerald Medallion in, and you're good to go. That's the only real artifact or mana rock ramp because the way the elves work, they do it themselves. So this is going to have every creature that I have in the deck. There are going to be some changes as I go. Based on some of the newer stuff that came out recently, I haven't had a chance to really open up a lot of my Zendikar Rising. I did get 1 box open, but I didn't get what I needed. So I'll go over, this is basically my first version of the deck. There will be some subtle changes that I will do a video on later. So the first things first is the 3 main things are the 1-drop Mana Dorks, Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, and Fintorn Elves. So I went with that. Normally, most people would do that. It's my first turn, Mana Dork drops. Next, the reason and the inspiration for it being dinosaurs was Allosaurus Shepherd. It's a 1 to cast for a 1/1. It's an elf shaman. Allosaurus Shepherd itself cannot be countered. And then green spells I control can't be countered. So it has a lot of good effects just as a 1-drop itself. It's got a lot of stuff to it, but the inspiration came from the other ability of 2 green, 4 of any. Until end of turn, each elf creature you control has base power and toughness 5/5 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to its other creatures types. So that was the actual inspiration for making it a elf dinosaur deck because I wanted to use the Allosaurus Shepherd. I opened it, I wanted to use it. Next is Llanowar Mentor, 1 to cast, 1/1. Elf Spell Shaper, pay a 1 green and tap it, and discard a card and put a 1/1 green elf druid creature token named Llanowar Elves into play where they have tap to add a green. So again, a little bit more abilities for ramping. Let me explain this to you. With every tribal deck, I always put in as much as I can for Anthem buffs. This is one of them. It's Jiraga Warcaller. It's a 1 to cast 1/1 with multi-kicker of 1 green and 1. And that means that you can kick it for as many times as you have the mana available for a green and 1. And it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each time it was kicked. And other elf creatures I control get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Jiraga Warcaller. Now, there are other ways to buff Jiraga throughout the deck to make her or him, it looks like, to make him bigger, to make my other creatures bigger. Elvish Reclaimer, 1 green for a 1/2 elf warrior. It gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard. And for 2, tap it and sacrifice a land. I can search my library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That's important for the lands. I will show you the lands in a second. I wanted to, because this deck was more important with the creatures, I wanted to go over the creatures first to explain some of the lands. Next is Priest of Titania. It's 1 green, 1 of any for a 1/1, and it taps to add a green to your mana pool for each elf in play. That should be pretty self-explanatory. Incubation Druid. It's a 2 to cast 0/2 elf druid. It taps to add a mana of any type that a land you control could produce, and if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, I add 3 mana of that type instead. And for 3 generic and 2 green, it adapts for 3, which means it gets 3 +1/+1 counters. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of these are foils. This deck I have most of the foils, just because I wanted to make this deck a little bit more special. Up next, Frontier Guide is 2 to cast for a 1/1 Elf Scout. For 1 green, 3 generic, and tap it. You can search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. This is to help thin out, because one of the things green does normally is mana ramp, specifically by putting lands into play. I did not go with the spells for that. I did it through the creatures, like I explained earlier. Everything here was creature-centric based, so I wanted everything that was a creature to be able to do the things the spells would do, so I could get more creatures into the deck. Also helps thin out your deck. The other theory I went with for this deck was green doesn't have a lot of card draw. It has some. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's indifferent. It's just card draw. I wanted to get the most I could out of the creatures. Still, a lot of the creatures, or not a lot, but some of the creatures here, their whole purpose is just to draw a card, but it's also an elf or a creature that helps the deck. So the Visionary is a 2 to cast 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. There are other versions of this in here as well. A late addition to the deck that I didn't think I had and somehow found is Eldamri, Lord of Leaves. It was actually the last card I added before I finished the deck. It's 2 green for a 2/2. It's an elf legend. That is the term that is used for it now. That was what it was errated to. All elves gain Forest Walk, and then elves cannot be the target of spells or abilities. So they gain Shroud, not Hexproof. Elvish Clancaller, another one of my Anthem cards. It's 2 green for a 1/1 elf druid. Other elves you control get +1/+1. The other ability doesn't matter because we're playing Commander or EDH, so there's no ability to get another card called Elvish Clancaller. Marwyn, you've seen that I made a budget deck based on Marwyn. This just happens to be an auto-include in an elf deck. 1 green, 2 generic for a 1/1 elf druid. When another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn, and then she taps to add 1 green equal to her power. Imperious Perfect, another Anthem. 1 green, 2 of any for a 2/2. Other elf creatures you control get +1/+1, and then the other ability is pay green and tap it to put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token into play, so it creates a 1/1 token. Llanowar Visionary, again, same thing with the Elvish Visionary. It's 1 green, 2 of any. It's a 2/2 elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and it can tap to add a green. I believe that Wizards put out a little thing when M21 was being promoted, where it was like, take an Elvish Visionary and a Llanowar Elf, put them together, and that's what you get with Llanowar Visionary. Nissa, the Vastwood Seer, 1 green, 2 of any for a 2/2. She's a legendary Elf Scout. When she enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic forest card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, if you control 7 or more lands, you can exile her, then return her transformed, and she transforms into Nissa, Sage Animist. Her +1 is to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield, otherwise put it into your hand. The -2 is to put a 4/4 legendary green elemental creature token into play. And then her ultimate is to untap 6 target lands. They become 6/6 elemental creatures and they're still lands. Her ability as a planeswalker is predicated on she helps to get cards into your hand. So she's more for card draw and to get land from your deck into play as much as possible. So she's more for utility than anything else. Alright. The first dinosaur you'll see is Wayward Swordtooth. 1 green, 2 generic. It's a 5/5 dinosaur. With Ascend, which means that if you control 10 or more permanents, you have the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. The ability to put an additional land into play is the reason why this is in here, other than it's a dinosaur, but it's also a 5/5 for 3. That kind of helps. With an elf deck like this and trying to draw as many cards as you can, this will probably happen quite quickly, the Ascend part. And then Wayward Swordtooth can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. The Archdruid, Elvish Archdruid, 2 green, 1 of any for a 2/2. Other elves you control get +1/+1, so another Anthem. And it taps to add a green to your mana pool for each elf you control, kind of like the Priest of Titania. Same ability, adds a green for each elf. So, Elvish Champion, another Anthem, 2 green, 1 of any for a 2/2. All elves get +1/+1, but they also get Forest Walk. Azuri, Renegade Leader, was actually on the chopping block, but I decided to keep it for a couple reasons. It's 2 green, 1 of any for a 2/2. So the reason I kept it was for the fact that it's repeatable. It's repeatable buffing, I guess is the best word to put it. So its first ability is pay a green, and you can regenerate another elf, not itself. And then for 3 green and 2, and it's a colon, so for every time you pay that, elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and trample. So I have a card in here that does that itself for the same cost. I will reveal that in a little bit. I just, for some reason, my memory's pretty bad today and I can't remember the name of it, but it's in here too. Jagged Scar Archers. The reason why this is in here, I played on the Xbox version of Magic Duels. This card was removed from your available card pool for a reason. It's actually really a good card. So for 2 green, 1 of any, it's a star, Elf Archer. The power and toughness are equal to the number of elves you control, so it can get pretty big pretty quickly in this deck. And then you can just tap it to deal damage equal to its power to target creature with flying. This deck doesn't have much in the way of flying or removal of flying. It's one of the very few ways to do so. Ewit, or Eternal Witness, is probably going to go in every green deck I have just because it's utility. 2 green, 1 of any. It's one of the very few non-elf or non-dinosaur creatures in here, just because, you know, its ability is amazing. So when it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. It gets things back. Runic Armasaur, 1 generic, 2 green. It's a 2/5 dinosaur. This is in here for the ability to be a repeatable draw in a blue deck. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of a creature or land that isn't a mana ability, you may draw a card. So, in a lot of games, a lot of people are doing a lot of things, especially in Commander. You have 3 opponents on top of, what you're doing. They're going to be doing a lot of things that may not include just tapping things for mana. Drawing cards off of that is a good thing, especially in a deck that needs to fill its hand quickly. I couldn't leave this out. This was purely just because its converted mana cost to power toughness to ability is just phenomenal. So it's 3 green for a 5/4 elf knight, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So it can't be chump blocked, and it's just, I had to because I like the card. Llanowar Tribe, pretty simple. It's 3 green for a 3/3 that taps to add 3 green. So that's, like I said, my ramp here was all creature based. Oracle of Moldiah. Forgot Oracle was an elf. I really did. So it was an auto include at that point. So 1 green, 3 generic for a 2/2 elf shaman. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. And you can play with the top card of your library revealed. And you may play the top card of your library if it's a land. So thinning out lands, it's essentially a draw if you can get a land off the top of your library. So it's a win-win. Another Anthem, Dwynen Guiltleaf Dane. 2 green, 2 generic, 3/4 elf warrior with reach. This is again one of the reasons, other than the fact that she's an Anthem, which other elf creatures you control get +1/+1. The reach was also in here because of my lack of ability to get rid of flying or defend against flying. She also has, whenever she attacks, Gain 1 life for each elf you control that's attacking. Renata, called to the hunt. 2 green, 2 generic for a star 3. The star is her power is equal to your devotion to green. And then each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Again, it's not an anthem per se, but it definitely helps get your creatures to be beefy and buffy. This was one of the best cards I think they've created in quite a while for elves. 2 green, 2 of any for a 2/3 elf that says whenever you cast a creature, draw a card. Simple, clean, definitely needed for green. Massive Myers, 2 green, 2 generic, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, so that's why that's in here. The added bonus was that whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay 2 green, and if you do, return it to your hand from your graveyard. Kind of a no-brainer. It's a repeated draw, especially in a deck that has so many creatures. Cultivator of Blades, 2 green, 3 generic for a 1/1 elf artificer. It's in here for its second ability. The first one is Fabricate 2. So when it enters, you can either put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, or you can make 2 1/1 colorless servo artifact tokens. The second ability, however, when Cultivator of Blade attacks, you may have attacking creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the Cultivator of Blade's power, because you have so many different things going on here. So, let me just explain. All the anthems, it's already going to have a high power toughness, and then when you attack with it, it adds that bonus again to each of your attacking creatures. So it was kind of a no-brainer with a double, ooh, look, I'm going to attack with 30/30s. Seaborn Muse, one of the non-dinosaur, non-elf creatures in here, just because. So we're in Omnath, so I'll explain this one a little bit more, because just because Seaborn Muse is a good card doesn't mean it should be in the deck, but for this deck it made sense. So 2 green, 3 of any, 2 Force Spirit, untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. That includes your lands and your creatures that tap for mana. So if you at the end of somebody's turn, you tap to add all that mana, and Omnath eats it and turns it into power toughness and holds it for you until you need to use it. That's why Seaborn Muse is in here. That's why all those, ability to drop extra lands are in here. Just because all the card drawing that I tried to get in here, all just so that Seaborn Muse could keep on tapping and then you retapping and then gaining more mana and holding it. Carnage Tyrant, 2 green, 4 of any, 7/6 dinosaur, can't be countered, trample, hexproof. Basically, it's kind of an alternate win con. It's not the biggest thing in the deck. There's actually one more creature that's bigger, but it's the biggest answer that's a dinosaur that you have. It's the biggest creature you will have, and hopefully it can get a lot bigger as you go. Vigor, one of my pet cards for putting in green decks. 3 green, 3 of any for a 6/6. It's an elemental incarnation with trample. It's to kind of help keep your creatures alive. So if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage, and then put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each damage prevented this way. And when Vigor is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle in its owner's library. It's to help keep your creatures alive and make them bigger. Excuse me. Nyx Bloom Ancient. This goes a lot more along with the Omnath way of winning. So you can, in this deck, use Omnath to win with commander damage. It is a possibility. I have built it so it can go both ways. Nyx Bloom Ancient helps that theory go a lot further. It's 3 green, 4 of any for a 5/5. Has trample. And if you tap a permanent, not a land, not a creature, any permanent you have, for mana, it produces 3 times as much mana instead. That's to make it so that you get all that green and throw it into Omnath. It's the alternate way to help win. This was for... Vorinclex is more for keeping you... Well, other than being hated on the board, because Vorinclex is just hated by all. It's to help it... You don't have much in mono green for defenses. You have big creatures and that's it. And somebody board wipes and you're screwed. Vorinclex kind of helps keep that in check a little bit. So 2 green, 6 of any for a 7/6 trampler. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So you get double green out of your forest, stuff like that. And whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So it slows them down, it ramps you up. Alright. The finisher, this is one of the 3 or 4, I believe, finishers that I have in here. So it's all about getting to a board state and getting Craterhoof Behemoth on the board. A lot of you guys and girls may know that. If not, I'll read them to you. 3 green, 5 generic, 5/5 beast, has haste. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. I have a bunch of stuff in here that's creating some tokens. I have some stuff in here that's buffing your creatures. This guy's the ultimate buff because for each creature you control, they get another one. It's almost like having a coat of arms on the board. And I have that in here, and I'll show you that in a minute. But that's your finisher. If you can get to the point where this is in your hand, you have a board state of, say, 15 creatures, you pretty much, unless something really wrong goes on, you win. Galta, Primal Hunger, was one of the 2 that are bigger than the other one I mentioned. 2 green, 10 generic for a 12/12. It's an Elder Dinosaur. Woohoo. It costs X less to cast, where X is total power of creatures you control. You can actually get this out for 2 green easy. And it has trample. So that's one of 2 big boys to help end the game. Adaptive Automaton was one of those cards that I was kind of iffy about putting in here because it's not really an elf, but it is. It's 3 to cast for a 2/2 construct. When it enters battlefield, choose a creature type. It is the chosen creature type, and it gives all other creatures of the chosen type +1/+1. So it's an anthem, but it's a creature anthem. And I kind of, I usually put like the Adaptive Automaton in most of my decks that are like this. I was kind of iffy on this one, but I kept it in there anyway. Again, changes will be coming. The other big boy in the deck is Blightsteel Colossus. It was just released again in Double Masters, so at one point when I was making this deck, it wasn't released yet from another set, so it was a nice hefty cost to go with it, but it's gone down since. But it's 12 to cast 11/11, Trample, Infect, and it's indestructible. And if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Blightsteel Colossus and shuffle it into your owner's library. So a couple of the cards in here don't actually die when they die unless they're exiled. So I wanted to go over the creatures on this deck first before I went over the lands because they're kind of blah, but the creatures are the most important part of this deck. As far as the lands go, Fabled Passage, just because I want to thin the deck out of bad draws later. I have a Strip Mine in every deck. You never know what you're going to run into. It kills a land. You may need to stop it at any cost. Doesn't matter what it is. Always need to have at least one thing to destroy a land. Bonder's Enclave I put in there. It taps to add a colorless. It's not what it's for. It's for the 3-tap draw card and activate that if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Again, looking for ways to draw cards. Reliquary Tower. I believe there's enough card draw in here to actually make this inclusion necessary. We'll find out through play. Thespian Stage is in here for another 1 or 2 other lands in this deck, and I'll get to that in a second. It taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 2, tap it, and it becomes a copy of a land and gains this ability. Rogue's Passage. If you're going to go with the Omnath smash everything, way to go, Rogue's Passage is one of the ways that you can get that accomplished. It taps to add a colorless, or for 4 and tap it, target creature's unblockable. So if you want to go with Omnath Smash, Rogue's Passage with, a couple other things, that's the way to go. Deserted Temple, again, is because of another land in here. It taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it to untap a land. Pendlehaven, because there's a lot of 1/1s in here, it taps to add a green, or it taps to make target 1/1, get +1/+2. The reason for all the other cards in here is to make it so this guy goes. I've owned a Cradle for years. I haven't had a deck I wanted to put it in. Omnath was the perfect choice. So Cradle, if you don't know what it is, it taps to add a green to your mana pool for each creature you control. It's a regular version. It's not a 401. It's not a gold board. It's the real deal. The whole reason for this deck to be put together was because I had this and I had Omnath. I wanted to give it a try. So that's why, Thespian Stage, in case somebody decides to destroy the original, I can at least have a copy out. Rogue's Passage for a Thespian Stage. But Deserted Temple was in here just so I can tap and untap it. That's a lot of green. The other reason for those things is also Nykthos, Shrine to the Nyx. It taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it. Choose a color and add your mana pool amount of that color equal to your devotion. There's a lot of double greens in here. It's a mono green deck, so it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of devotion on the board. So, again, it's almost equivalent to a Gaia's Cradle, almost. I say, in some cases, it could actually be more. Not often, but it can be. And then the rest are just basic farce. I usually like to put regular foils in, so the rest are foils. So I always put my deck list in the description of the video. You can take a look at how many lands I went with. I believe I went with a total of 35 lands for this. 33, I think, actually. 33 lands, but I'll have it in there. It'll be in the description. So that was the creatures and the lands. The rest of the deck is kind of utility. That's why I don't have many sections of this deck. So this one's going to be all quote-unquote Anthem style cards. These are buffers. It's to make the creatures bigger. Icon of Ancestry actually has a small little advantage to just being a buffer or an Anthem. It actually helps me draw cards. So it's 3 to cast. I can choose a creature type. Most likely it'll be elves in this deck. Creatures of that chosen type get +1/+1, so it's an Anthem. It's in here for the second part, though. 3 and tap it. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, and you may reveal a creature card of the chosen type from among them, put it in your hand. So it's not card draw. Technically, it's, it helps you search out some stuff, and it helps you thin your deck and basically puts cards in your hands. Same thing with Vanquisher's Banner. It's 5 to cast, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Again, elves probably. Creatures of that type get +1/+1. And then whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. So these two serve a similar function, are similar cards, except for one you can search your cards. This one just lets you draw a card. So Coat of Arms I talked about earlier. It's 5 to cast, and it says each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares a creature type with it. A lot of people get this card confused. It has an example on the M10 version. I'll read that to you. For example, if 2 Goblin Warriors and a Goblin Shaman are on the battlefield, each get +2/+2. And the reason for that is for each other. So if there are 3 creatures, say I have 3 elves, they each get +2/+2 because of each other elf. Cage Stun, for ramping purposes, for mana purposes, to get more green mana in my mana pool, and for Anthem style effects. This card does it all too. 6 to cast, when it enters the battlefield, choose a color, green obviously in this deck. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1, Anthem style, just like the deck wants. And then whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana to of the chosen color to your mana pool, add an additional 1. So mana ramping, it does everything I need it to do. Chroma's Memorial is for defense of your creatures to make sure they live. 7 to cast, creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and from red. That protects them from damage for the most part. It protects them from black's spot removal for the most part. It doesn't stop it from, say, damnation or anything like that, but it stops it from spot removal, which is mostly what black does. But it also gives them flying, which is the most important part of this. I don't have flying. This helps get it there. The 2 cards I was talking about earlier. So, Azuri basically turns into an Overrun. I couldn't remember the name of the card. But I have Overwhelming Stampede and Overrun. It's the last parts of my buffing and Anthem style stuff. So Overwhelming Stampede, they're the same card but with a different effect. So 2 green, 3, until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And Overrun is 3 green, 2 of any, and they all get +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. So these are my game finishers. These are how I end the game if I don't have any other way. So that was that section. The rest of the deck is the... I'm going to do it all at once. Usually this is where I put several different things like defense and this and that. I want to let you know, so I have a theory for this deck that I wanted to keep with. You're not going to see a lot of defensive stuff. You're not going to see a lot of removal. You're not going to see a lot of anything. My point to this deck was to get Omnath on the board, get a lot of elves on the board, over on the board before they even have anything that matters. That's the point of this deck. It may work, it may not. I'll test it and see, and we'll see in the updates. Up first, Endless Atlas. 2 to cast artifact. You can pay 2, tap it, draw a card, but you may only activate this ability if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. There are 20-something forests in this deck, and the only non-forest lands in this deck are utility-wise better than a forest, but you're going to have plenty of the same name on the board. So, my way to draw. Throne of God Pharaoh. It's 2 to cast. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. Now, this is a, turn sideways, go roar, but it's also a tap to add mana for the creatures. Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, Fyndhorn Elves, they all turn sideways to add mana. And most of the time you're going to use it on your turn so you can get a board state quickly. This is on the board. You're still hitting people for a lot of life if you've got the right setup. Dark Steel Plate. Normally this section is for Lightning Greaves or, something that gives it hexproof. I wanted to try something different with this one. I wanted to go a different direction. So I wanted to make it so it could be targeted, but it couldn't be destroyed. So 3 to cast. It's an artifact equipment. It's indestructible, and it makes the equipped creature indestructible. So I don't care if you're targeting it with things, because it's indestructible. You can't kill it unless you remove it. Yeah, it probably should have been hexproof against white, but I wanted to try something different for once. There are 2 or 3 planeswalkers, two planeswalkers, and one that flips into a planeswalker. You saw the first one. This is the second planeswalker. Vivian Reed, 2 green, 3 of any, comes in play with 5 loyalty. Its +1 is to look at the top 4 cards of your library. Reveal a creature or land from among them and put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom. It helps filter through your deck and helps you get cards in your hand. Its -3 is to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. That was the very littlest I could do for defense, but because her +1 was so good, I had to include her. Her ultimate, again, does what all the other stuff in here is hoping to do. Get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. So, she has a little bit of defense put in there for it. I'll take it. I've been looking for a way to get Nissa, Who Shakes the World, into one of my decks. Most of them don't use enough forests to make it matter. This one uses nothing but. So she's 2 green, 3 of any, comes into play with 5 loyalty. She has a passive ability of whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. It works great with Omnath. +1 is to put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it, it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance, haste, and it's still a land. And its -8 is you get an emblem with land you control, have indestructible. Then search your library for any number of forests and put them onto the battlefield. Can you see why she's in here? So, okay, they become, elementals instead of... Is it elementals? Yeah, they become... I'll find an elemental deck to go with it. But for now, she works here. Concordant Crossroad. This is one of the ones that's on the chopping block for the next... I'm going to call it a tune-up. When I tune up the deck, I'd like it. I don't like giving my opponents the same ability. So it's 1 green. It's an enchantment. Enchant World is done. It's an enchantment. Basically, it gives all creatures haste. All creatures. That's the problem, is it gives all creatures haste. I want it just mine. The reason why it may come out is because I'm missing the other half of the combo with Sylvan Library. So Sylvan Library is in here. It's a 2 to cast enchantment, and it reads for 0 basically during your draw step. You don't have to pay anything for it. You draw 2 extra cards, then you can choose any 2 cards you've drawn this turn, and for each of those cards you may pay either 4 life or put it back on top of your library. So you draw 3 cards with this in play, because you're going to draw the extra 2, and you choose one of them, put the other 2 back on top of your library. The card I'm missing is Abundance, where Abundance kind of makes it so that you basically draw all 3 cards with no loss of life. I don't have it in here. I didn't have one when I first made the deck. I did order the Zendikar Rising Commander decks, and they're in there, so I will be changing that for the next time. Descendant's Path is 1 green, 2 of any enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card that shares a creature type with a creature you control, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost, or otherwise put it on the bottom of your library. A lot of elves in here, a couple dinosaurs, possibly if you have Allosaurus Shepherd out, they're both. You can just at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card, and boom, there it is. It's another creature you can play for free. You don't even have to worry about drawing it. This is probably my favorite green card ever made at this point. There's a lot of cards I like. None of them as much as I like this card. I think that this card will go in every green deck I have that's based around creatures, when, let's face it, most of them are. Going forward, I need like 100 of these. Excuse me. So, Guardian Project. 1 green, 3 of any enchant. In Commander, mind you, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Easiest way in green to draw a card. Let's just be honest. You're playing Commander, you're playing EDH, whatever you call it. You're not going to have anything with the same name, so it's always going to net you at least a card or two. Leyline of Abundance. I was originally going to take this out until I played, I do a lot of, I call it fishbowl testing, where I don't face an opponent, I just see how the draws go. I was going to take this out until I started playing fishbowling it. This card is a superstar. So it's, excuse me, 2 green, 2 of any for an enchantment. And if it's in your opening hand, you begin with it in the game on the battlefield. Or, I'm sorry, you begin the game with it on the battlefield. Whenever you tap a creature for mana, you get an additional green. And for 6 and 2 green, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and you can do that as many times as you want. The amount of mana this deck can produce is actually astounding, and you'll be doing that a lot more than you think. So, the fact that it starts the game, if it's in your hand, on the field, and you first turn in an Llanowar Elves, or an Elvish Mystic, or Fyndhorn Elves, second turn they're tapping for 2 green already, and you didn't even do anything yet. So, it actually, I did a couple fishbowl hands where that happened, and that's why I'm giving you that example. It's really good. Alright, Asceticism. Another really good green card. 2 green, 3 of any. Creatures, basically it gives your creatures hexproof, and then for 2 you can regenerate a creature. That's basically what that reads now. Another card is on the chopping block, still may stay in there. When I was fishbowling, it came out to be a lot better than I thought it was going to. Zendikar Resurgent. It's 2 green, 5 of any. I was going to take it out because it costs way too much. But it ends up not costing as much as you think. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that it could produce. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. It does everything I needed to do. It's staying in there for now. I'm going to continue testing it when I finally get to see some opponents, maybe one-on-one or even in a group setting. I think it'll actually do a lot better than I give it credit for. Green Sun Zenith. It's 1 green and X. It's a sorcery. Search your library for a green creature with converted mana cost X or less. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And then shuffle Green Sun Zenith into your library, into its owner's library. This is to help you go find just about any answer you need or anything you need to buff. You can go find you something that makes it so your creatures can't be targeted. It's got a couple of things that it can do. So it's a sorcerer speed dose, so just keep that in mind. Worldly Tutor, same thing, but it's for 1 green. You search your library for a creature, reveal it, put it on top of your library, or shuffle it, then put the card on top. So you can have to draw it, but it still goes and finds a creature you're looking for. This is basically for Craterhoof Behemoth. The way that these are working, it's looking for Craterhoof to end the game. Harmonize, again, more card draw. Probably the best card draw spell in green. It's 2 green, 2 of any, draw 3 cards. Simple, plain, easy. It's just doing what it needs to do. And then the other card draw that I have near Rishkar's Expertise. 2 green, 4 of any. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You're buffing your creatures anyway, so it should be a lot of cards. And then you may cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. It's a bonus. You draw a lot of cards, and then you get to play something for free, so you don't have to spend mana that you've already spent. So that is my Omnath build. A lot of people build Omnath differently. I'm seeing, I'm having a small issue. I do still have some remnants left over from my last MS issues that I've recently had. For some reason, my head's not wrapped around what I'm trying to say with Omnath Smash. I'm using that as my term, and from now on, I may just use that as Omnath Smash. But I'm looking for the term where your commander does all the damage. I'm just not. It's not coming to me. My head's not saying it right now. Like I said, I'm having I have a small leftover problems from my last flare from my MS. But you can do it in, technically in many different ways. So I'm hoping that I was able to give you a different idea on how to build specifically like an elf deck or an Omnath deck. I've noticed one of the things that I do with some of my stuff is I have a little different way of thinking how I want to build stuff. So I'll give you an example. Omnath is my idea of the leader of the elves. He's the elf lord of choice for commander. Kind of like I think Perforos is the goblin, the true one and true goblin king. He should be the head of every goblin deck, not Krenko. But that's just my way of thinking. Some people think that way, some people don't. It's how I believe it's just my way of thinking. Not everybody's going to be the same, and that's okay. That's why we all play Magic, and we all play it differently. But I'm hoping that I gave you at least a little bit of insight into it, that I like to build things and how I built Omnath, and hopefully it helps you if you're deciding to build Omnath, because I saw that it was spoiled as a Commander Green Special something. I don't know. It's coming back. They're re-releasing it on the special set, so hopefully if you're going out there buying it and you're like, oh, I want to build them, hopefully I gave you somewhat of a better idea on a way to build them without it just being one direction. This deck actually goes in a couple different directions at the same time, helps you get around certain things, helps you, whatever. So hopefully I gave you some nice tips and hints on how to go ahead and build it. But that's my Omnath Locus of Mana build. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If not, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm here, every day, trying to do something. Anyway, so that's my Omnath build. Like I said, I am done for now, so I'm going to ask you to do me the obligatory subscribe, like, and share. Please go ahead and get this out there. Help me get it out there. Subscriptions are great. I'm actually at 157 as of the making of this video. I was actually surprised. I think I got like 5 of them in a day. So let's keep that train rolling, and we'll go from there. This week I actually have a surprise for you guys. I'm actually releasing 2 videos, but not on the same day. Usually I release these videos on Fridays. This week I'm actually going to do one Friday, one Saturday. So you will see that coming up. I will actually go ahead and promote these things as they're happening. So Friday you'll see this, and then Saturday you'll see another video that I decided to make because I'm actually backed up on my unboxing videos, and I want to get caught up on them. So anyway, thank you for watching. Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I will see you next week.